Today we're going to be looking at adding and subtracting decimals. Today's learning goal is I can add and subtract decimals. Some jokes. Did you hear about the big news that came out yesterday? It was discovered that French fries weren't actually cooked in France first. Yeah, they were actually cooked in Greece. So I'm reading this new book about anti-gravity. Have you heard of it? I just can't put it down. Before we start, let's look at some vocabulary. Decimals. Decimals are used to name values that are in between whole numbers. You might have learned this when you were in kindergarten, but you had these things called whole numbers here, like 1, 2, 3, and 4. And things don't always end up as an even whole number. Sometimes you get these things called decimals, which are in between whole numbers. Let's pause.
$8, of course.
Yeah,
You're so funny.
I made the kids laugh. I kind of told that joke in class.
Hey, did you place the iron order, right?
Yeah, it should be here soon.
Because I need the chicken broth to make my soup. In that order, right?
Yeah, it's in the order. Okay, I'm gonna hit play. So when you have a decimal, as we said, there are these numbers that are between numbers on a number line. See? You can also write decimals as parts of a whole in sort of a fraction form. So here you have one whole, because the whole thing's filled in. Here we have a tenth. Doesn't tenth kind of sound like 10? Yeah, it does. See? So there's 10 out of 100 filled. Here we have just one tiny square filled in. So there's 1 out of 100 are filled in. So we would say 1/100th. Now that we've covered some vocabulary, let's look at some notebook practice. I understand that you can do these in your head, but sometimes we need to practice these by writing these on pen and paper. So we have here, how would you say this? 2 and 2 and 7/10. 2 and 7/10 plus 3/10. So we have 2 and 7/10, 2 and 7/10 plus 0, 3/10. So whenever you're adding decimals, it's really important for you to stack the numbers. What I mean by stack is you put them on top of each other with the bigger number on top of the smaller number. If you consistently put the bigger number on top of the smaller number, then you won't have any mistakes. So we can begin adding these. 7 plus 3 is 10. Carry the 1. 2 plus 1 is 3. We end up with 3. Number 2, 6 minus 4/10. So we have a whole number, which is 6, and we have, you're right, 4/10. So we'll begin by stacking our numbers. So what number do I need to put above the 4 here? 0. Because we want to include, or we want to insert zeros in for empty place values. Let's go ahead and subtract. 0 can't be taken away from 4, so I'm going to borrow next door. 10 minus 4 is 6, and there's nothing to subtract from 5, so we end up with 5.6. I should say 5 6/10. Let's move on to number 3. Feel free to pause the video and try this on your own if you'd like. Evaluate 5 and 35 hundredths minus m for each value of m. So I'll begin by stacking my numbers. So 5 and 35 hundredths minus 2 and 37 hundredths. So I look to take away, at first I put the bigger number on top, and I can't do 5 minus 7, so I've got to borrow, and borrow again. Make this 4, this will be 14, and this will be 12. So now I do 15 minus 7, which is 8, 12 minus 3, which is 9, and 4 minus 2, which is 2. And I get 2 and 98 hundredths. Let's look at part B. We'll begin by writing our number sentence. Uh-oh. How am I going to line this up? So I want them to be lined up. So I get that. There we go. So I'll start off. I see my 5 is bigger than my 0, so I can just put a 5 down there. But 3 is not bigger than 8, so I have to go next door and borrow. I'll make this into 13. I'll get 5 and 3. So I get 3 and 55 hundredths. Our last question. So we have 5 and 35 hundredths minus 4. And how would you pronounce this number? So we're going to pronounce this as 4 and 7,612 ten thousandths. So notice that we have nothing above our 1 and 2 here, so we're going to add place values. So we've got to start borrowing here. So we do 10 minus 2, which is 8. 9 minus 1, which is 8. 4, I can't borrow, or I can't subtract 4 from 6, so I've got to go next door and add one more. Take one more from next door, and it'll give me 8. 12 minus 7 is 5. And 4 minus 4 is 0. So our answer is right there. So So here is a worksheet of story problems here. So feel free to pause the video and try these and read these on your own. So let's go ahead and start. How many more tons of imports than exports does the Port of New Orleans handle each year? So again, pause the video and try it on your own. So first we have to find the Port of New Orleans, which is here, and we're looking for imports and exports. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the bigger number and write it on top of the smaller number. Just like that. And when we subtract these two numbers, finding a difference of these two, we get 465. So our answer is 465. Number 2. How many tons of imports and exports are shipped through the port of Houston, Texas each year in all? Are we going to add, subtract, multiply, or divide this? How do you know? Well, an important phrase to remember is when you see in all, it means to add. If we go back and look at our question, how many tons of imports and exports, we know we need to add both of those numbers together. So our total number in Houston, Texas is 75, and our exports is 33 and 43 hundredths. And when we add these together, we get 108 and 55 hundredths. So, the question is, how many tons of imports and exports are shipped through the port of Houston, Texas each year in all? 108 and 55 hundredths. Let's go down to number 3. Again, pause the video and try this on your own. Which port ships 39 hundredths more tons of exports each year than that of Corpus Christi, Texas? So here I have to look at Corpus Christi, Texas, and I'm looking for a really big number or a really small difference. Well, remember, decimals are very small, and we're just dealing with 39 hundredths here. So I could tell that this has a very small difference. So it has to be B. Notice how all the other numbers have a very large difference. Let's move on to number 4. Pause the video and try this on your own. Number 4. What is the difference between the imports and exports shipped in and out of Corpus Christi port each year? Ask yourself, am I going to add, subtract, multiply, or divide? Well, difference means to subtract. So I want to subtract the exports and the imports. Line up my decimals and stack my numbers. And when I subtract these two numbers, I end up with that. So if you said H, you're correct. Let's go on to number 5. What is the total number of imports, total amount of imports shipped in the nation's 5 busiest ports each year? So we're looking for the total amount. Are we going to add, subtract, multiply, or divide? When you're looking for the total, that means to add. So we have to take all these numbers and add them together. I know, looking at my 4 answer choices here, I could rule out these two. Because I already know that this plus this is going to be pretty close to these two. So after adding up all these numbers, I'm left with 238,022 hundredths. Last question, number 6. What is the total amount of exports shipped out of the nation's 5 busiest ports each year? Are we going to add, subtract, multiply, or divide these? If you remember from the previous question, total amount means to add. Last time we added the imports. What are we going to add this time? The exports. When we add up all the exports, we end up with 128 million and 25 hundredths, which is G. Today we looked at adding and subtracting decimals. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Mr. Alu.